Hello. This is Derek from One Over Tea and Tao Teaware. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Hello. This is Derek speaking to you from the cool, breezy spring comforts of my very own apartment here in Yangzhou, Jiangsu. I say this because last month in April, I spent the entire time, plus a few weeks there, just traveling through the mountains and rivers of rural China. I packed 3 t-shirts, a jacket, 2 pairs of pants, a couple sundries, 2 cameras, a drone, and a set of Rode lavalier mics into a hiking backpack, and I set off to travel and source tea. And for me, this is an incredible odyssey, which I've been undertaking. Started in 2019, really, when I started doing these every seasonal trips. Of course, it got disrupted with COVID and stuff like that. But it really is, for me, I love it because tea happens all at once in China. It kind of feels like that. And so even if I try it in 2019 and then 2021 and then 2022 and then 2023, by the time 2024 hits, there are still places I've never been, just because China is too large and the tea season is too short. And so in my mind, I have this like working time map of China where I need to be at certain times to pick certain different types of tea. And I can't be everywhere at once. I think I mentioned this, previously when I was sourcing the Kuashan stuff, where I never got up to Kuashan because the timing just didn't work out. I had to go to the Big Snow Mountain instead. This year I actually made it to Kuashan. But again, this trip, this 1 month, a month and a half of just traveling with just a backpack on my shoulders, it's really rewarding, really fun. It's my favorite part of doing this tea business. I mean, other than drinking the nice teas that I find along the way. But this gets me into the gardens. This gets me talking to the makers, experiencing the cultures around the teas, and connecting it with it in a way that I've never experienced before. And very difficult to connect this deeply other than being on the mountain with the people making the teas. And so for me, while I wouldn't trade it for the world, it is still very taxing on my body, very difficult. So many long train rides, middle of the night flights, buses, trains, taxis, cars, bumpy roads, very little sleep, very little downtime. Like I mentioned, the things I packed. I didn't pack anything to kind of entertain me, right? No books, no anything like that, because I simply don't have any time. I'm either taking the photos, drinking the tea, traveling, or posting about it, because that's another thing I was trying to do, is post about it on social media and stuff. And of course, one thing that, I've kind of gotten away from, but a lot of times the stuff you see on the social media, you don't really see the work, you just see the results, right? And this is the trade secret of social media. You don't show people your failures, you just show people your successes. And then when somebody looks in on it from the outside, they just see how beautiful and how wonderful it is, and they are a little envious, but they don't really realize, how much struggle you've put into making this, how much struggle goes behind the scenes. And so I mentioned I've been trying to challenge that a little bit and show people, the late night flights, the long train rides, the difficulties in the process, because it makes it more human. It makes it more relatable, more real, less perfect, which, we always want to show our most perfect side. But anyways, for me, this tea trip that I've been doing all this time, it's really a defining characteristic of my life. Living here in China, I've oriented my apartment here, my job, my side job, my lifestyle, all so that when spring tea hits, I can drop everything and disappear into mountains. And this is, so incredibly important. I remember when I first did it, the very first time, this 30-day hike through all corners of China with just one backpack. It's something I do by myself. And when I first told people I was going to do it, they were like, no way. Like I could never do that. And, I had my own doubts about it where I'm just like, the first time, I was like, is this going to be enough? Like, is this one backpack? Is this, I don't even know anyone in a lot of these regions. I'm just going to go to Anxi and see if I can find some Tieguanyin. Like, that's the extent of my itinerary in my notebook, right? And actually, the Anxi one didn't quite work out. So that's an example of sometimes I get lucky and sometimes I don't. And again, like, this is one thing that it's kind of frightening. It's a lot of work. It's very taxing, but it's something that I will never regret. I will never regret doing something like this. And for me, it's one of those few moments in life where the reward far outweighs the struggle. Even though the struggle is pretty intense, even though it's very taxing and I had to like lay down for like 2 weeks as soon as I got home, it's still well worth it. I mean, the people I meet, the teas I find, the experiences I have in this life, this is something that I would not trade for anything. And while I wouldn't suggest for you to necessarily come hike through China and source teas yourself, I think this is something that's transferable and relatable to a lot of other people's lives. Find something like this, some great challenge, a great endeavor, something where the hopeful result and the experience gained alone will be life changing and validating and rewarding for like the rest of your time here. And something you can point back at and say, like, I did that. That was me. I am powerful. I'm capable. And of course, like, you'll have to do it within reason. You'll have to do it within limitations. But at the same time, you don't know your limitations until you test the boundaries, until you test your limits and you try things that are outside of that comfort zone. And then you realize, oh, I can do that. And then you become more powerful and you have more experiences in this life. Anyways, for me, it's a miraculous moment, something that I'm truly obviously very proud of if you can't tell. And it really started this Tea Soup podcast because last year, 2023, in January, I started this. And I was like thinking about the tea trips in 2022. And I was like, man, I have so many stories, so many things I really want to talk about and explore. And stories that if I don't tell, will probably just be forgotten, right? I mean, I'm not taking enough notes. I'm not writing any books here. It's just between me in the mountains and the farmers I meet on the mountains. And if one of us forgets the moment, it's gone forever, right? And so a moment like that, a journey like that, an odyssey like that sparked this whole podcast and then just, yeah, reaffirms my passion for tea, my passion for life here in China, and my love of people because I meet some just wonderful people out in these mountains. So getting back into kind of what this spring tea trip entails, I have this time map of China. I have this schedule. I have to schedule my busy days. I have to coordinate the tea seasons across 2,000 kilometers, regions that are some nearly impassable. I have to figure out where I need to fly, where I can train, where I can bus and hike. I mean, for example, I was trying to hit Taiping Hokui this year, but they started picking April 14th and they finished picking April 19th. And so that window is really, really difficult. And I had a connection to this really wonderful production household who makes authentic, handmade Taiping Hokui. He said the only way to get in there was a 10-hour hike. And so I'm just like, okay, I have to have a day in on either side. I have this very, very tiny window. But really, at that time of year, I was also coordinating with Alex, and I met him in Meishan County by Emeishan in Chengdu, and that's where we got that Sichuan silver needle, that Sichuan green tea, the jasmine tea, the Sichuan black tea, which we'll release soon. And you guys, the tea supers out there, you've already listened to that episode that happened during the time I should have been in Taiping Hokui, out by Huangshan and Anhui. And so really it's like, sure, I missed Taiping Hokui this year, but I gained an experience in Sichuan and those stories and stuff. And next year I can just put Taiping Hokui on the 2025 list. And so it really is, that old adage, too much to see, too little time. But that's why I like it, because my springs are always full. There's always something new to see, new to do, old friends to connect with. And I'm also working with the weather, right? Like trying to get Chaozhou when it's not raining is very difficult. I've never seen Yunnan in the rain yet. It's just been serious droughts out there. But one timestamp that I'm always kind of working around is Qingming Jie, or the Qingming Festival. This is April 5th, and it's really important for a lot of green teas and kind of seen as a point in time that's associated with the tea season very, very heavily. So, in this episode, I kind of want to get into that Qingming Festival and talk about those experiences that I've had around that time, what teas pop off. I've already talked a whole lot about the Longjing tea, so I'll just brush over that. But this year during the Qingming Festival, I was in Fujian, in Fuding, on the coast, the eastern coast of China. I was there for 2 days and then I flew all the way west to Yunnan and I was in Linsang, which is on the by the border of Myanmar. This is literally from one side of the country to the other side of the country, all during the Qingming Festival. And so I got to see very different cultures experiencing this holiday, and of course, all through the lens of making tea. So first, let's talk about the Qingming Jie. What is Qingming Jie? A lot of tea drinkers know this term because of the Mingqian teas. Mingqian, or pre-Qingming, means before the Qingming festival, which is April 5th. And so any teas that are picked and processed before April 5th are referred to as Mingqian teas or pre-Qingming teas. And that Mingqian, Qian means before, and then Ming is just the condensed version of the Qingming festival. And so Mingqian, before the bright festival teas. Now, if you remember way back, I think it was maybe episode 6, the Fuding tea types, I talk all about the different solar terms. The Chinese agricultural calendar splits the year into 24 solar terms. Each of these terms occupy 2 weeks of time, and they're given a beautiful name. One of them is Qingming. And this is pure brightness, and it's associated with certain things you're supposed to be doing agriculturally in China. But as tea drinkers, we really just boil that down to teas. One interesting point about the Mingqian teas, and the idea that the best green teas are picked before the Mingqian festival, this is very, very localized to a specific region of China. This is the southern reaches of the Yangtze, the Jiangnan region. This is Suzhou, Jiangsu, Hangzhou, Zhejiang. And so you're looking at very specific teas, green teas. You're looking at the Biluochun in Suzhou. You're looking at the Longjing, the Dragon Well in Hangzhou. These two tea types, and maybe the Anji Baicha. The Anji Baicha is also right on the edge. It's kind of on the other side of Lake Tai from Suzhou. Anji Baicha is a green tea, even though it says Baicha in the name, which means white tea. Anyways, there's a misnomer there. I've seen people asking if teas are Mingqian about any type of tea. About, the Wui Yan chas, some of the Jinjun Meis, a lot of the black teas, red teas, pu'er teas. Also, I've seen like Gushu pu'er teas, and they say, oh, it's a Mingqian tea. Which, yes, Mingqian tea just refers to a tea that was picked before the Qingming festival, but not every tea type ought to be a Mingqian tea. Not every tea type is in its proper season before April 5th, and some are well before April 5th. I'll give you some examples here. The picking for Wui Yan cha, that really begins late April, early May. And so you will never ever get a Mingqian Wui Yan cha. So the Jinjun Mei there, it could be before the Qingming festival, but it's not really characteristic. They're not pushing and trying to get it picked before April 5th like they are for a lot of green teas. For pu'er, some of the gushu teas, they don't get picked until mid-April. They're sometimes a lot slower. This goes all the way from Linsang down to Sichuanbana. When I was in Linsang for the Kuashan, this was like April 14th, or no, April 10th, April 11th. they hadn't even started picking. And so April 10th, they're not even picking their tea. To really enforce this idea of Mingqian tea onto pu'er, it's really kind of shooting yourself in the foot there because the best tea will come when it comes for pu'er. For green tea, yeah, you can start picking it very early. And Sichuan's another example of that, where you really don't want to use this Mingqian tea terminology because in Sichuan, they can start harvesting mid February. Mid February, late February, by the time Mingqian comes, a lot of places in Sichuan, they've already harvested 90% of their teas. And so if you're looking at Sichuan and saying like, oh, I only want the Mingqian teas, you can get a wide variety of highest quality and lowest quality, all Mingqian. And so bringing this back to the idea that it is very localized for the southern reaches of the Jiangnan region, the southern reaches of the Yangtze. Another thing I mentioned, a lot of the Anhui teas, the Taiping Hokui, like they pick April 14th to April 19th, right? And then Luan Guapian, they're post Qingming, mid April or late April. I remember we went there April 28th, and they were kind of just finishing up their season last year. I think the Huangshan Maofeng, it's not necessarily Qingming as well. And so when you're looking at this terminology, you have to kind of realize it has its certain scope. The Mingqian teas for, I was in Fujian and Fuding, right? The white teas, the silver needle white tea, you don't want a silver needle white tea that's picked in April. You only want it picked in March, right? And so all silver needle should be Mingqian. And then the Bai Mudan, sure, you could have it pre-Qingming or post-Qingming, Mingho as they call it. But you really just tell by the leaf size, the amount of leaves, the bud size, and stuff like that. You can't pick a mid-April white tea and pass it off as, silver needle or Mudan Wang. And so the proof is in the leaves themselves. And so for white tea, you really don't even need that Mingqian qualifier. It's really just sorry, I'm laughing because the scope is just getting smaller and smaller when I'm thinking about this Mingqian idea. The Longjing, the Dragon Well, the Suzhou Bilotrin, maybe the Anji Baicha, and then maybe some other green teas that are produced in this region. I think one thing to realize is that back in the day, in the Qing dynasty, in the Yuan dynasty, in the Ming dynasty, there was a lot of tea production, a lot of culture going on in this region. And so this was like the green tea like origin point for a lot of like the cultures, high societies, export and stuff like that. And so this terminology of Mingqian became very important to them here. For most Chinese people though, this Qingming Jie has a very different connotation. They're not thinking about tea. It's still referring to this specific date. It's referring to this solar term, but it's also talking about the festival. This is the Tomb Sweeping Festival. And if you can't guess by the name, it is very similar to, in Western cultures, in America at least, our Memorial Day, where we visit the graves of those who have passed and we clean the graves, we leave flowers. Here in China, they do that to their ancestors' tombs. They clean them off, they leave flowers, they leave offerings, incense, food, feasts. But it is rather a more somber, kind of serious holiday involving visiting family graves and tombs. And so as a tea nerd, when I first got here to China, and I was like, oh man, I'm really excited for Qingming Jie. And all the Chinese people are like, that's a very strange holiday to get excited about. But for us, it's all about us, as in the tea people, it's all about the green tea, the tea season. It's going to happen. And you do get some time off of work, right? This is very similar to Memorial Day, a long weekend or something like that. But for most people, it involves going back home to your Laojia. It could be in the village, in the rural areas, seeing your grandparents, visiting graves. And it's a very like, okay, I have to go do this thing with my family and stuff. It's not like a big spring tea trip travel kind of holiday. For an outsider, for me, it is. Because I've been here for, 7+ years, and I've never really been invited to participate in a Qingming festival kind of ritual, except for this year. This was my first year I was able to do that. And I'll tell you that story here at the end when we get out to Linsang, Kuashan, and Yunnan. But let me give you a few more stories about my Some funny things that have happened to me being here in China, not really understanding the connotation of this holiday or understanding it in a different way. Because when I first got to China, I really didn't realize how, it was more somber, serious holiday. And so I'd go around wishing people a happy Qingming festival, right? And some be like, oh, happy tomb sweeping day. And after a lot of odd looks and some people would kind of say it back to me, but look a little awkward. And then finally, one of my Chinese friends sat me down and told me, like, that's not a common greeting. Like, not a lot of people wish each other happy tomb sweeping day. And I'm like, okay, I finally desisted. But there are still a few other awkward situations that happened to me around this tomb sweeping day, just because as an outsider, I wasn't fully briefed on this holiday, like what it truly means to the average Chinese person. I was insulated in that bubble of tea culture. So the first kind of like awkward experience I had was within like the first 2 years of me moving to China. It was one beautiful spring day. I was biking around, just really enjoying that weather in late March, early April. Perfect spring, breezy, bright, sunny day. And I was biking around through kind of the outskirts of the city, through the more agrarian parts where the city meets the fields, down small alleys, little small villages that kind of pop up here and there. And I bike through them, bike away from the odd dog that chases my bike, and just really kind of existing in this liminal flow state, this peak experience, as Maslow would call it, where time doesn't exist, objectives don't exist, goals don't exist. Everything just feels perfect at the right time, and I'm just a leaf on the wind. I'm biking wherever I want. Everything feels ideal, exactly where it should be. And I stop by this temple that I see in this rural outskirts. I pay my respects, and then going back outside, I see a lady with a smiling lady with a cart. She's selling small bundles of flowers, and they're bright yellow. They look beautiful, and she's smiling. I see somebody else buy them. I see, oh, she bought them for like 5 kwai, 6 kwai, which is $1. And I'm like, okay, yeah, give me a bundle of flowers. And she's like, oh, sure. And so I buy some flowers. She gives them to me. I take them home. I put them in my kitchen. I take some nice photos of my whole experience, right? And I share it on Chinese social media. And that same friend reaches out to me and she says, where'd you get those flowers? They look like tomb sweeping flowers. I'm like, yeah, I got them from a lady on the side of the road by a temple. She's like, those are for uh, dead people. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, oh, these are the flowers you're supposed to put on tombs and graves and stuff. You probably shouldn't have them in your kitchen. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. And I think she was very worried. I left them in my apartment that night. I didn't have any strange dreams of ghosts or visitations or anything, which is fine. And, thinking that they were, a rather singular set of flowers for a singular purpose, I didn't want to just throw them in the plastic garbage bin. And so, the next day I had a quest where I had to go out and find a beautiful place to kind of put the flowers, and did my own little ritual for thinking about, all of my ancestors and the ancestors of the land and stuff like that. Anyways, it was a very interesting moment where that was my first kind of connection into this tomb sweeping holiday. And I had almost messed it up quite a bit. My second tomb sweeping day mistake was kind of irrelevant. I didn't realize that they were connected at first, but now looking back, I see, like, of course. During this time, one thing that they do for the tomb sweeping day is they sweep the graves, they offer flour, they burn incense, and they also burn money. And so during this time, you'll see a lot of shops that are selling fake money, and they're selling different, fake things to kind of burn and stuff like that. At this time, when I first got to China, I was, teaching English, and I'm looking for, kind of different tools, teaching tools, realia, to help encourage my students to get excited about, learning. And I was like, oh, paper money. This is really cool. I can start giving the kids paper money instead of rewards. We can play a little game where, like, who has the most money? And so I buy a pack of money. and and I bring it into the school, and I'm showing the Chinese teachers, like, hey, I got all this like fake money. Like, why don't we just use this? And they were terrified, absolutely horrified by the fact that I had taken, this money that's meant for, the ghosts and the ancestors, and I had taken it into the school, and I was going to give it to the kids, and they're like, you cannot do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just throw this away, I guess. And they're like, don't throw it away in the school. Take it outside and get rid of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's another very singular tool with a lot of power for this like ritual, this tomb sweeping day ritual. And I looked at it a little closer, and it's like, yeah, like it's like the Ghost of the Dead bank, and it's like dollars only available for the ghosts of the dead. And I'm like, oh, this is, yeah, should have thought about that. But at least the Chinese staff, the teachers, prevented me from giving it to the kids and really causing a little bit of an awkward social scene. But it was very funny looking back on. The only other kind of cultural experience, knowledge I had about Tomb Sweeping Day, Qingming Jie, outside of tea, came from a poem written by a Tang Dynasty poet called Du Mu. And the poem is just called the Qingming. And so it's really just a very singular poem, the Qingming. And it goes like this. 清明时节雨纷纷，路上行人欲断魂。借问局家何去有？牧童遥指杏花村。The translation of this poem is actually very simple. They're not using a lot of complicated language, which is, one of the reasons I adore Chinese poetry. It's got 4 lines. Each line has 7 characters, and it's so simple and so clear and beautiful. So the translation goes something like this. Tomb sweeping day, rain falling lightly. Travelers shuffle by, broken-hearted. I ask the way to the nearest tavern, and the sheepherd points off toward Apricot Village. And if you can't guess by the imagery of the poem or how I read it, it is not the happiest poem. And looking at it a little more deeply, you can kind of see this is somebody who's on the road, who's traveling, who's far from family, far from friends. And during this time of year where you're supposed to think about your ancestors, think about the people that have came before you, that gave you life, that supported you and your whole lineage, and you're out somewhere beyond the veil. They're beyond the veil, you're out somewhere beyond the pale. And it has this crushing sense of loneliness. Like it's a very sad poem. And what's interesting about this that I kind of didn't realize until living through a few tomb sweeping days is around this time, it rains a lot in the southern reaches of the Yangtze, where likely this poem was kind of penned. You see a lot of rain during this time of year, this early spring. And so it has this feeling of like, oh, new life is coming, but then it's dampened by all this rain, this incessant rain. And so the fact that there is rain in the poem ties into my experience this year of Qingming Jie in Fuding. I remember during that time, everything kind of shut down for 2 days. I mentioned 2 days I was in Fuding for the tomb sweeping day. I mentioned 2 days because that's kind of how long they spent observing it. And so for me, this gets back into that time map of China, that time map of spring tea in China where you want to be at this place at this time. So the pre-Qingming festival teas, Longjing, the Dragon Well, Biluochun, maybe the Anji Bai Cha, you want to see these end of March, really, really early. And then by the time Qingming hits, they're already moving on to, their Ming Ho stuff, which is larger leaves, a little more power, much cheaper. And so actually, if you want to buy affordable tea, don't go to these places before April 5th because it's just crazy expensive before then. However, if you go before April 5th, you know that all of the tea is pre-Qingming tea, right? If you go after April 5th and they tell you it's Mingqian tea, there is that little seed of doubt. Anyways, I always try and visit them before Qingming Festival, and then this year, because Qingming Jie is kind of a national holiday, everyone gets time off, I was able to do a little bit of traveling with a friend. And so we went to Fuzhou, experienced kind of the Fujianese culture, went down to a beach and stuff like that. And then right around Qingming Jie, right around April 4th, I left from Fuzhou up to Fuding. This is April 4th in the morning. I was going up to Fuding to visit Cho in his newly created factory. It turns out that same morning, he was coming down from Fuding to Fuzhou. And so we were essentially on the same track, different trains heading different ways, missed each other in the morning because he has his ancestral home is outside of Fuzhou. And so he was coming back to Fuzhou to see the family, to do the tomb sweeping services, burn incense, leave flowers, etc. I get out to his factory and I realize, like, oh, production's on hold because Cho isn't here. The master's gone. He's observing tomb sweeping day. And so there was not a lot of tea going on. Cho's wife was there overseeing the final drying phase for some of the Mudan Wang. But really, it felt very subdued, very quiet. You know, they weren't picking teas because the pickers were also on leave that day and the next day, April 5th. And so I was able just to take a few days walking around the mountains. It was really lovely because it was a very fine drizzle. Like, I didn't really need an umbrella. I could stay out for a long time. And the mountains were just empty, which it feels so strange because there was fresh tea on all of the bushes. But this really gives you a sense that this is a very important holiday, one that a lot of people will observe. And so during this time, things do get very quiet, things shut down, and people go visit their families, visit their ancestral tombs and whatnot. Now, as I mentioned, Cho is a Fuzhou native. His wife, however, is a native of Fuding. And so on April 5th, Cho comes back that evening of the April 4th. I see him, we eat dinner, and then the next morning, they go out and visit his wife's ancestral tombs, their memory hall, if you will. And they go out. I see their daughter, the whole extended family, aunts and uncles and stuff like that. I wave them off, and then they go do their own family thing, and they're like, "Oh, just rest here." Like, you know, the cleaning lady, cooking lady will prepare some food for you. I was like, okay. And so I just kind of like had the factory to myself on most of April 5th, which was kind of bizarre. You know, I get there. I'm trying to get there within my time frame of like, okay, like April 5th, April 4th, Qingming festival. That time should be really nice time for the Mudan teas, which I'm really excited about, and for the final drying of the silver needle, which I was perfectly on time for. But because of the Mingqian holiday, I had, 24, 48 hours of just nothing. I just hung out. No one was there really doing anything. And then April 6th, work really resumed. And so here's an interesting point from my perspective. Here, I'm not invited into the activities. And, frankly, why should I be? Because I'm an outsider. These aren't my ancestors. And it's also, in their mind, this is a duty. This is something they should do. They ought to do. It's not a fun, exciting thing, right? It's interesting for people like me, but, I'm not like everyone. They probably wouldn't assume it would be interesting to me. They would just assume it was boring. And then it's a sensitive point where, like, I don't want to be like, no, I'm really interested. I want to come and see your private rituals. But yeah, we'll talk about that later because I kind of accidentally fell into that in Kuashan in Linsang, Yunnan. However, talking a little bit more about Fuding white tea, just to give you a kind of a feeling of what was happening, what the process is. I know I talked about this a long time ago in the first 6 episodes of Tea Soup. But at this phase, what was happening is all of the silver needle had already been picked. The different grades. The really fine silver needle A class, B class, C class, D class. In these classes, these grades, they're essentially like days apart as far as like when the bud germinates and when it's picked. And so silver needle, it's not just one thing. There are different qualities, different grades and stuff like that, even within the same producer. This is really interesting for white tea because with a lot of other teas, with Feng Huang Dan songs, with Wu Yan Chas, with Pu'er, you get different mountains, different shantos, you get different cultivars, different varietals, different processing methods. With white tea, with Fuding white tea, it's almost always going to be processed identically in this really clean, ideal processing method. The only difference, and it's all the same varietal really, except for the gongmei, the only difference is pick time and size of the leaves. That's really the differentiating factors here. And so they get really specific as far as this bud is 1 day germinated, this bud is 2 day germinated. This size of this leaf is a little too large, so that falls into the lower grade of the silver needle. And so if picking time started in April 15th, They have had enough time to pick all the different grades of silver needle and then a lot of the Mudan Wong. And they're right now, what I found out on April 6th is they started picking the late Mudan. So this is like one bud, two leaves, maybe one bud, three leaves. They're almost bordering on spring shomei. And I won't go too deep into the different styles of white tea, the different names, the different grades, but I will briefly run you guys through the picking processing methods, right? And so after the tea is picked, it's brought into the factory and they separate it out onto these very large bamboo baskets, and they're very flat. They don't want the leaves heaped up too high, maybe an inch or 2 inches deep. And then they put these on racks and racks and racks. And so for the first day after it's picking, it's kind of this controlled withering down. They're using a lot of fans, a lot of air circulation to make sure that the leaves don't get too hot, they don't get too wet, and they allow adequate air exposure to kind of let the leaves wither down without trapping any of the moisture. This is really one of the key points where if you're doing this wrong, you're going to make brown shomei. After they let it kind of air dry like this, air wither down for a while, and it loses a certain percentage of its moisture content, then you can put it out in the sun. And again, you're still putting out in the sun slightly elevated so that wind can flow through it. If you pile it too deep, if you heap it, if you don't let air flow, it's going to turn brown. It's going to turn a little sour. You want to keep the white tea as green and as white as possible. And then really after that, it's just this controlled process of withering and drying. I mentioned I saw Cho's wife doing the final stages for the Mudan Wang. What she was doing is this yang cha process, where when the tea is like 90% dry, they heap it into these big piles. And each pile is like 100 kilograms of tea picked from different regions in the mountains, picked on different days, but processed together. And this is like this homogenization process. We're taking all of these different teas, or teas from different parts of the mountain, different amounts of sunlight, different soils, slightly different soil content, and you're batching them all together. You're trying to create different lots, right? And so every 100 kilograms of white tea, it'll be piled together. You'll get this like yang cha process, and it'll be a single lot. That way, when I go and I buy tea from them, they can record which lot I was buying tea from. And if I want, 5 kilograms of this of lot 1, then 10 kilograms of lot 1, and then I want another 10 kilograms, and they say, oh, actually, we're out of that lot. Do you want to try lot 2? And they give me a sample of lot 2, and I'm like, okay, it's pretty much the same. This is a really cool way to kind of keep control of it. Anyways, after this yang cha phase, then you have that final drying, and then you have this sorting and stuff, which is getting rid of all of the some of the broken leaves, some of the stems, and any debris that was picked with it, like little pieces of grass, alien leaves that are not from the tea bushes, stuff like that. Anyways, if you're curious about the whole process, check out the first couple episodes. I only bring it up now because I took this knowledge and I made my own micro batch of white tea up in the mountains of Hubei. Stuff that I picked all by myself. I withered down, I sun dried, and it turned out green. And I tried to get the makers down the mountain to help us do this, the Lo Shui Yuan Cooperative, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't make it green. It all turned brown, or most of it turned brown. We figured out, it was interesting because I was showing them, what I learned from Fuding, and we were implementing it because they're like, oh, we can't make it green. It always turns brown. I'm like, oh, you're not elevating it. You're not letting wind flow. You're not letting air flow. It's getting too hot. You're heaping it too thick. And just from this kind of like experience of seeing it, I kind of knew the process well enough to know where it's going wrong. So that's why I kind of brought it up here, because it's been on my mind. Anyways, one of the most interesting parts about being with Cho this year and being in the factory and hanging out there talking to them is realizing how this, I'll call it the post-COVID economy is treating him. Because I've heard from every province, every tea maker I know, the tea market's been in a difficult state. Not a lot of people are buying tea. They're not buying as much tea. Prices are going down. They're not getting as much money from it. It's really, really difficult for everyone involved. And Cho is no exception. He hired a team of people to do Douyin. Douyin is like live streaming. And it's really popular in China to sell your products. It'd be like an Instagram live, YouTube live, what have you. But on it, there's a video and there's just buttons where you can watch on your phone. You can press this button and you'll buy something. And so it's kind of like this like live stream where you're constantly showing the tea, you have a tea table set up and you're just talking to the camera and people are buying and you go, "Oh, now there's a special for the next 10 minutes, whoever gets this." It's like kind of those old infomercials you see like call this toll-free number right now for this tea at this price. Anyways, they've hired a team and they do it almost 24/7, like 7 days a week for like 12 hours a day. And they said that they've been making a good bit of money doing that. However, this is them really, they've never had to do this before. Before it was just normal tea sales, it was good enough. Now tea sales have been dropping right when they open their own factory. And so they're in debt from the factory and they're trying to create more money. And this is working really well for them. One interesting thing is I mentioned a lot of people are struggling in the tea world. My old friend, old Zhang, Master Zhang, who we were buying the tea from, he was pressing the cakes. If you've had our Antiquity, the Grandmother Mountain, the Modern Nuwa, those are all teas that come from Zhang and Ginger. Ginger's pot of land on Taimushan. And then Zhang is the producer and he pressed it all. This year, Zhang didn't make any tea. This year, Zhang got another job. He was just designing packaging. He's selling tea packaging. He's not pressing his own tea because there just wasn't enough money in it for him. Zhang is a guy who's by trade like a mechanical engineer, right? And he got into tea because it was kind of his passion and everything. But he realized that this year it's so difficult to actually make a lot of money with tea that he moved on to doing something else. And so Cho was kind of like, Cho and Zhang are kind of old friends. Like Cho was a pseudo mentor to Zhang, right? And so we kind of talked about it, and Cho was a little disappointed, but he's like, I understand it's difficult to make money with tea this year. And as a result, I was able to get a higher quality tea for a lot of the teas that I'm getting from Cho at a lower price than last year. And so for me, it was really nice. And Cho was encouraging me. He's like, like this is the year to really stock up on the good quality teas because next year the price will probably go up. This year the price went down. It was really interesting. It was one of the first times the price for white tea went down since 2018. I think I mentioned 2018 was the year the government came in with a lot of regulations on how much tea you can make. It needs to be, pesticide free. You can't pick in the summer months. As a result, to kind of get the farmers on board with this, the price for fooding white tea across the board started rising, getting more expensive, and more expensive. And so for the past 5 years, we've seen this steady rise. It's not been astronomical, but after 5 years, you can kind of see a difference in the prices. And then right now in 2024, we saw it kind of reduce a little bit, almost back down to that 2018 price. And so when I say there's a dramatic drop in the price, it's only now that I'm realizing that it's been on a steady rise for a while. And I mentioned this to some people in Feng Huang and Dansong and Chaozhou. And I'm like, yeah, ever since 2019 when Xi Jinping came to Chaozhou and said Feng Huang Dansong is good, and the price started rising in 2019, I realized there's a similar thing that was happening in Fuding, and now it's kind of dropped. Some of the reasons are because of that post-pandemic economy, which is not very good right now. Another part is because of these big companies that are driving up prices, like the big company called Pinpin Cha, another one called Shaoguan Cha. And these big companies have so much control of the market. If they buy tea, the price goes up because there's less tea. If they don't buy tea, the price goes down because there's more tea that other people can buy. It's really, really fascinating how much control these big, huge companies have on that market. And so this year, a lot of those big companies, they didn't buy tea because they have a lot of backstock, because they are not selling as tea as well because of this post-pandemic economy. Anyways, really interesting to see that state of the market here in Fuding. And it's been happening kind of across the board. My tea master in Yangzhou, Jiangsu, says that these past couple of years have not been good for him selling tea. And he's trying to figure out, because he's been trying to sell his own red tea, which hopefully we can carry this year. But the prices have been pretty high for that. Anyways, talking a little more about the Mingqian teas. the Qingming festival, and these kind of dates and the mind map of where to buy tea in China when. The Qingming festival is a very big one, April 5th. And another one that's very important to me is the Dai Minority New Year out in Xishuangbanna, Yunnan, Linsang, that area, because everything shuts down for like 3 or 4 days then. And that's usually April 12th, April 13th, April 14th, April 15th. So between April 6th, which is the first day after the Qingming Festival, and April 12th, which is the last day before the Dai Minority New Year, I have about a 7-day window to get from one side of China to the other side of China and start sourcing some teas that hopefully I could press. Because everything, again, will shut down as soon as the Dai Minority New Year hits, and then I have to wait there for, 3-4 days before they start making tea again. And so working with this time map of China, I'm always trying to hit this area at this time between these holidays and everything. And so I spent another day with Cho because he actually finally starts picking tea and processing it on the 7th or on the 6th, and I can watch that whole process. And then I have a midnight flight from Fuzhou all the way to Kunming on the 7th. However, complication arose in the form of an earthquake in Taiwan that happened right around this time. A lot of the flights, because in Fujian we're very close to Taiwan, and a lot of the flights got delayed because of that. And so fast forward through me observing Cho picking and making tea on the 7th, or on the 6th, which I recorded a lot of videos, and I will release a video of that process someday soon on the One River Tea YouTube channel, wherein this podcast is also available on. However, fast forward that I need to get out to Linsang. I get to the airport in Fuzhou right around, it was a 9 o'clock flight. Yeah, it was a 9 o'clock flight. And so I was ready to get on a flight from Fuzhou at 9 o'clock, get into Kunming around 10 or 11, probably like 11:30, and then I booked a hotel. This flight was delayed until midnight and then until 2. And so what happened is I got into Qingming after staying up in the airport all night, having a late night flight. I got into Qingming at 4 a.m., a little after 4 a.m., and I had a ticket for the first train from Qingming to Linsang was at like 8. And so I essentially unintentionally pulled an all-nighter at the very beginning of this tea trip, which again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, it's not a walk in the park. These 30 days, a month and a half of traveling through the mountains and rivers of China, it's a lot of work. And this was one of those sleepless nights early on where I couldn't sleep in the airport. I get on the plane, I barely sleep. I get to the train station in Kunming and it's bright and early, and then I barely sleep on the train. I get into Linsang around 12, and Lanjie, who I mentioned before, is going to pick me up from the airport, and we're going to check out some mountains. And I get into the car after arriving in Linsang, and Lanjie picks me up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just kind of want to go to sleep. And she's like, oh, actually today though, we're going to go to Kuashan. And I was like, okay, let's go to Kuashan. She's like, you can roll back your seat and sleep in the car. And I'm like, okay, so sleepless night. As soon as I get into Linsang, we're off into the mountains. However, this was one of the places I didn't get to visit last year, and probably my most anticipated place to visit. I actually found out that Lanjie not only knows farmers in Kuashan, she's married into the family. Like, it is her husband's ancestral plot of land that the Kuashan tea cakes come from. And so while I always thought Lanjie was, kind of an independent sourcer, was finding teas from this person, she's actually married into a tea farming village. And then she's selling that tea primarily, and then a lot of other teas. And so Kuashan for her, that is the bread and butter. And so I'm so excited I was able to go visit there. And yeah, it was a little north of Linsang, maybe like an hour and a half north of Linsang, out into the rural mountains, up switchback roads and stuff. Again, it's weird coming from one side of the country to the other side of the country, because in Fuding, when it was kind of constantly drizzling. Here in Linsong, it hasn't rained for months and months. It's still in the second year of an epic drought. There's red dust everywhere. The soil is different. The air is different. It's higher elevation. It feels completely different, very arid. And we get out into the mountains and I start seeing the tea bushes. And these are different tea bushes than in Fuding as well, where the tea bushes in Fuding are all shrubs. Here you're seeing the smaller, taller, spindly trunks, larger trunks, some gushus in there. But a lot along the side of the road are either the small bushes or the chaomu. I mentioned chaomu a lot. Chaomu it means like a tree, a tea tree. And as the name in Chinese implies, these are not small bushes. These are tea trees that are usually taller than a man, taller than a human. They're like 2 meters, 3 meters tall. And so they're not small trees. However, when compared to Gushu and Dashu, they're on the smaller end of it. Kuashan is famous for its Chaomu, and I'll kind of get into it maybe later when I'll go more in depth. But right now, I really want to focus on what happened when I first got out there to Kuashan, because we get into the village, into the household where they make the Kuashan tea, and what's interesting, what I notice immediately is there's no tea. I'm like, are you guys actually making tea? And they hadn't started picking yet. It's April 7th, and they haven't started picking the teas yet. And, I'll tell you about walking through the fields, but there are no real buds on the leaves yet. Like, they're very, very tiny. Obviously, you can't start picking it yet. And then this is, again, why I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that Ming Chen is a very relative term for tea producing and tea producing times. It's very specific to a region. And so anyways, I get into the production household, the Wang production household from Lanjie's husband's side. And they're all gathered around this pail. And I see what they're doing. They're killing chickens. They're killing like 3 or 4 black chickens. And they're the small, skinny chickens that run around everywhere. And they're called, like in Chinese, they're called the pao bu ji. At least that's what they call them here, just running chickens. And I think at first, I'm like, oh, are you guys killing the chickens for me? That's way too nice. Like, you don't have to do this. I know chickens are a very valuable resource here. And I find out they're not killing them for me. What they're doing is they're doing their own Qingming festival, their own tomb sweeping. And so they're preparing a spirit feast. And I've never seen this before, even though I know it happens, and I've never been able to participate, but it looks like that's what Lanjie has brought me into. I get to experience this, creating a feast for your ancestors and doing the tomb sweepings out here in the rural mountains of Yunnan. And again, this is, a few days after the Qingming festival, but here in the mountains of Linsang, they have a wider range of this holiday. And so it takes a little longer to do it, and they're just now getting the families together and getting out into the mountains. And so as soon as I get there, what they're doing is they're killing the chickens, they're cooking the foods, preparing all the meals, and then we're drinking some of the teas from last year, some of the teas from different regions, and then we go into the fields. And kind of at this point, I'm still unsure what's going to happen. This is my first time doing this, being part of a tomb sweeping ritual, and so I'm kind of just along with the ride, right? First, we go to the old ancestor tombs, which is rather small, in distant mountains, up some dirt roads, and then we all climb through it. Some of the people have the machetes, so they can cut old paths to the tombs, because if you have a tomb on a rural mountain in, a tropical region, and that only gets visited once a year or something for these tomb sweeping days, it does tend to get overgrown. And so the first part is kind of hacking through the forest trying to get to this tomb. And then as soon as they're at the tomb, they've brought, some candles or some incense sticks, some cups for some alcohol to give as offerings, and some money to burn. And so I see them do this. It's a relatively quiet kind of ceremony here. But this is for the kind of like the ancestral tombs, which is interesting because this isn't the really, really important one. The really important one is their father's tomb, which we're going to go to next. And so we spend a little bit of time there and then go to the father's tomb, which the father's tomb is in a much more manicured area where they have tea bushes growing. This tomb is in the middle of a tea field. on the side of a mountain. And this is where they're getting this white tea from. And I remember during that time, I was taking some photos, I was taking some videos. I had kind of thought, like, it's too bad I can't see them picking and making tea. And instead of seeing this other ritual, I might as well, document it and participate in it and enjoy it and live it. But at the same time, I was like, I came here for tea and now I'm just seeing this tomb sweeping. But it turned out that a lot of people shared my interest in this, even though it's not directly related to tea. Or I say not directly related to tea, but a lot of people corrected me and told me, no, this is tea. This is tea culture. And I remember that situation, like being in the middle of a tea field while all of this is going on. And the people are like picking the leaves and talking about the buds, talking about the different leaves, how long this has been in the family. And this tomb is for their father. It's got two compartments. One has, a painting, a mural, text to their father. And then the other one, the other kind of window it looks like, is bricked up. And that is for their mother. And their mother is this really old lady who has helped preparing the dishes, very, very smiley, very happy. And she didn't come to this tomb for the tomb sweeping day. Perhaps she visits it more often than everyone else does. But it was really powerful to see just the living, you have one side bricked up, one side with a painting. Like one part of this family is in the spirit world, one part is still in the physical world. And being able to participate in both was very fascinating. And so we're in the tea bushes and they're burning incense, huge amounts of incense. And it's really interesting where they bow 3 times. They do the kowtow, where they put their forehead all the way down to the ground. It's a very serious bow. All the family lights incense, does the bow, places the incense. They gave me some incense and asked me to burn it and do my offering. So I was able to do that as well. And then comes the food. They take out the bowls, put it on leaves, the bamboo leaves, or the banana leaves, the bajau leaves. Different bowls of different food and rice with chopsticks, and they make the offerings with those as well. And then they take a small bowl, mix everything together, and this is Mr. Wong is doing this, Lanjia's husband, who seems to be the eldest son, right? He makes this little mix of all the different foods that they're offering, adds some alcohol into it, and then throws it behind the grave into the bushes behind the grave. And then, to my surprise, we start eating the food. The food that's left over, we share it between us. They give me both the chicken legs, which is, quite a huge honor, because even here in China, the chicken legs are like the best part of the chicken. And so they give me both of them, and they're eating the different pieces of the chicken, all the different foods and everything. And they say it's really healthy, very good for your spirit, very good for your body. This is after undergoing this ritual, the food is even more nutritious than regular. And yeah, it's really amazing seeing them do all this ritual, offer this food, eat the food in the tombs, in the field of tea on the mountain, and then realizing, like, this is where the tea comes from. This is Kuashan. This is that Kuashan pu'er, the hummingbird pu'er. This is that Kuashan white tea, the forbidden fruit. This is the skinny chicken. That's the name of the new Kuashan cake I'm pressing this year. And realizing, like, these are the people behind it, the living and dead. This is the culture behind this tea. This is where it all comes from. This is what really, just like that spirit food, this is what gives it its true nutrients. This is what makes it more wholesome, more integral than any other faceless tea I could be drinking. This is tea with depth, with roots, with culture. And yeah, I mean, it all feeds into the tea itself. And so after having that perspective, and thank you for everyone who mentioned that was fascinating tea culture in itself, because I was worried I was getting away from the tea and I was getting into something else by talking about the Qingming festival. And now I'm realizing, like, no, this is integral. This is so much a part of the identity of this tea, of the people, of the land, the histories, the ancestors, everything going into it. It's really magnificent and beautiful, the gestalt, when you really take a moment and feel it. And I started getting that feeling when they started burning the money. And this is always something that I've found interesting ever since I made that mistake buying the money and trying to use it as a toy, as a game in my classes. And then realizing like, oh, this has deep spiritual significance. And I was able to see it finally and participate in it in that really real way where you're offering money to your ancestors, you're burning it. And this idea of burning offerings has been around for a long, long stretch of human history, like tens of thousands of years. This idea that when you burn something, it disappears from this plane of existence and reappears in another plane of existence. This is the initial offering of foods to the gods in ancient Greece, ancient Rome. You see this all throughout the different cultures. And so it's still cool to see that kind of modern reflection of it where now money is the big thing, right? Now we're burning money. We're not necessarily burning food and bones. And then seeing, it's kind of this like, I wouldn't say blind ritual, but it's something, sometimes people just go through the motions of it, but then the ritual has power in itself. And it was neat to see the whole family coming together and participating in this, sweeping the grave, lighting the incense, offering the food, offering the flowers. You know, don't put them in your kitchen, put them on the tombs of your ancestors. Burning the money, burn it, don't play with it. And then the final thing, and this is really funny because there was the whole family was involved, as I mentioned, like even the babies, the toddlers that were being held were just sitting under the tea bushes, sitting in the shade of the tea bushes in their best clothes, watching this whole ritual unveil itself. And I remember I have a photo of, you know, one of the babies under the tea bush while they're undergoing this ritual, and I'm just thinking this is the people behind the tea. This is the tea culture, the tea children. And the final stage, one of the aunties, the old ladies, grabs the child and starts running away with the child. And I'm like, what's going on? And then the fireworks start. It was like the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It's so loud in this quiet, peaceful, kind of blissed out state. And then, and I start running away too. There's smoke everywhere. I have some good photos of just like smoke rolling over the tea bushes from the graves and stuff. Again, this is my favorite part of the whole experience of sourcing tea is seeing these stories behind it, seeing these people, these rituals, this life in modern China, modern tea culture. And this is something that I really want to share it in any way I can. And so this Tea Soup podcast is a great way to do it. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being here for it. And I really hope some of you will get to try some of this Kwashan tea. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Until then, this is Derek from One River Tea, wishing you all to brew happy.